happiness down and under. But it is time for Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mecky. So I hope you have your tinfoil hat all made and cinched down tight over your ears. So take it away, Dave and Mecky.
Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave only tonight. Normally Dave and Mecky, but we're on WCCR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on, you guessed it, www.revolution.radio, where it's more than just radio. So jump into the chat room at the station and you can chat with us while we're on air, or me specifically tonight. This is show number 371. If you're keeping tabs, that's what it is. 8th year. It's all good fun. Weekly show, by the way. If it was only if it was a daily show, big deal. Yeah, it's a year and a bit. It's on air, online, and on your smart device. So grab an app to listen anywhere you are, or listen at home on a Grace tabletop digital radio. If you missed Solaris' show with Mr. Rowe, you missed out. Awesome show. As that time slot always is, you should tune in to the slot before us. Mind you, you should tune into any of the shows on Revolution Radio. They're all fantastic. If you don't know who we're talking about, Solaris or Mr. Rowe. It was Rolaris today, because he filled in for Solaris. If you don't know who we're talking about, you need to get yourself into the archives of the station's archives. Subscribe for $5.95 Australian a month. I think it's only $5. I don't know how much it is, to be honest. Just go to the website, have a look. I think I'm donating $5.95 Australian towards it to get access. And not only do I get access to my shows, but I get access to Solaris' shows and every host show. So if you don't know who we're talking about, you can do that. Mecky and I, because we live in Australia, and you should think about how you would word this next phrase for yourself in your own situation wherever it is that you live. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. Where I live, it's the Darkinjung people, and where Mecky lives, it's the Garuk people. And we pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. And I add that let us remember that beneath everything we've built, you know, the roads, the houses, all the buildings, all the infrastructure, all the electrical and the gas and all the sewage lines and the freshwater lines are lands which have had stories passed down from family to family, from person to person, for over 240,000 generations. It's a lot of time. That's a lot of generations. So, and I'm really being conservative in when I derived that figure. I knew that I had to be just a little conservative. But, you know, if you know me, yeah, it still sounds like a lot, because it is a lot. And what's even better than that is I was watching a great documentary that was this week that was about I should state, it was about the Anunnaki and the Bible and the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch, and it had the Hebrew Bible as well, and it was showing, but it showed from a perspective that would be best described as university, probably PhD doctorate. In that it was extremely specific about the wording. It gave many, many references, and it showed and paralleled all of the stories and kept going back to the original Sumerian discussions in Sanskrit, in cuneiform text, in the cylinder seals, and other pieces that have been found, broken or otherwise, and pieced together. And it was something else. One of the things that stood out most for me was that I recognized this from a long time ago, something that came about. Now, Meki and I recently learned about the Igigi, but we didn't know, so we got even further in depth. One of the things that the documentary mentioned was the black-headed people, and it also said that this is the documentarian, the person talking about this documentary, the narrator who'd written it when I got to the credits. They said that and this is what I attached myself to, this is a piece of information that I hadn't really concentrated on, but because it came from this perspective that was not my current one, it shone light on something that I hadn't recognized. And that was that the text itself, the Sumerian text, was, for the best description, says this person, and I'm completely paraphrasing, I can't remember the terminology the fellow used. However, it highlighted something really important, and that was that it didn't seem like they were there at the time writing it all down. This is the pre-flood existence, if that makes sense to you, because there were the gods, or the Anunnaki, created people, but not humans yet, people to do their work. Just giving you a brief history. And they were south of Eden, down near the mines in South Africa, for the most part. And then in Apsu, I think that's where that was, Apsu. And then Eden is where they had a whole bunch of other people similarly created, in the same way, right? The same kind of people. This was the black-headed people. And then this is where I realized that I'd missed something. It is that the Sumerians weren't then. The Sumerians didn't come about till later. But the only way that they could have this information, as intact as it was, talking about the birth mothers, there's 7 on one side for males and 7 on the other side for females, and but Meki and I, we used this same description when we did our show, and the clay, they did pinch of the clay, and spit and blood was introduced, which is doing DNA, as we know. DNA was introduced, and then it was put into a birthing mother, either for a boy or a girl. So it was predetermined. What I liked about this was that the narrator said that because it was so accurate, the description, and it had been such a long time ago, because we're talking 250,000 years ago that this initial work was done, and the Anunnaki were here for some time, and that they didn't create humans until quite recently, like 12,500 years ago, for instance, or 12,500 BC. That was 10,000 years ago. Sorry, 12.5 BC. 12,500 BC. So what that they couldn't have possibly retained that level of detail if it was purely anecdotal. And so that the only way this could have been scribed was if it was described by the Anunnaki before they left. That means they were around at the same time. The relationship was good enough for them to provide our origin, answer our origin question, the origin of, well, where do we all come from? And the Anunnaki went, actually, to be honest, I'll tell you that we made a race of people, right? We came here ages ago. We came from somewhere else. We came here just for the gold. And we've mined a whole bunch of gold, and we used like these people we made, but they got all uppity on us, and they didn't want to do the work anymore. But by the way, they were really tall compared to you. So we decided not to make giants anymore because the giants were too tall and too easy to beat us. So we made smaller people, and smaller people might be weaker. And despite your weakness, you can crawl into small holes better, and maybe do more mining that way. And so the perspective that I never saw was this, that the accuracy of the documents from this historian's point of view provided so much detail, and the detail would certainly have been lost if it was anecdotal. That's the magic right there. So this historian was saying that it's clearly right. All the other texts from all around the world, including, what was the one from India, saying that he likened all of these different stories about the battle with the gods, and this is what Meki and I have been talking about. We've been talking about the same thing. I just happened upon this documentary, and I couldn't believe that it's everything we've said. Talking about confirmation bias, I was astounded to see that someone had arrived at the same outcome. That's the kind of thing, you talk about peer-reviewed papers. Well, we've come to those. Now, he still left the question open that Nibiru could be a planet or a spaceship and no one knows yet. It's all in documentary. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I mean, this is what this platform is for. We talk about these things too. And I just go, well, Meki, we're going to make a documentary. We have to do it. So we're looking into that at the moment. We've got some topics, and let's hope, it would be great if we had a TV show. We always joke about finding Bigfoot. Well, the show isn't called Found Bigfoot. It's called Finding. So it's inevitable that it's never going to occur. They're never actually going to find Bigfoot, but it's the fun of the chase. And I like that premise. Anyway, so having heard that show, I was suitably impressed by the level of detail that they were going into as well. How many cross-references that person had put in, and was reading text from every biblical text and historical text that described a similar event, just like Meki and I do. Oh my goodness. Look, but there's 19 minutes gone, and what I wanted to say was a couple of really, really funny stories, or maybe an opinion of mine. So this is an opinion piece right now. We're in Easter, right? So we have Easter holidays, and the police in the state that I'm in operate what's called double demerits, which means if you weren't wearing a seatbelt and you would normally lose 6 points on your license out of 12, that you would lose all 12, and then you're walking home. And there's still a fine as well. And it's trying to save lives. Now, we've already lost 3 people. It's like 1 a day so far. And I think that's still too high. But I was reading through some of the police published stories. And the quote that comes to mind is that police are stunned at how stupid people are. That they're just completely stunned. There was one person that was caught doing 100 miles an hour, which is about 160 kilometers an hour, but they were doing 152 kilometers an hour, so say the police. And when they were pulled over for speeding, they suspected something about the car, and they discovered a woman asleep in the trunk of the car. No one else, it was only a driver and his person asleep in the trunk. Like, who knows what was going to happen there? What do they stop? At what point was it a sensible thing to put the person in what we call it the boot of the car, in the boot of the car, and have them sleep what off? Sleep it off? Maybe it was a date rape drug. I don't know. The story doesn't go into any depth. And I thought, wow, that's pretty stupid. You know, if the car was involved in an accident, that person's just, they open the boot up and just, you know, the trunk, and the person's just all mangled and broken in there, you know, not being restrained. Basically, you'd be hit by an object doing 160 kilometers an hour or 100 miles an hour. Blunt force trauma, that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hoit. That's gonna leave a mark. But the bigger story, because that's just the way we go. I had a police car follow me for a couple of Ks today, and then got bored because I don't have any outstanding warrants. My car's registered. I have insurance. I have a license that's not expired. Although my car does attract the boys in blue. I should say the people in blue. Bit sexist, isn't it, boys in blue? The police, I'm driving bait. My car looks like a racing car. It doesn't sound quite like one. I had to make it really quiet so I wouldn't get pulled over all the time. It's covered in spoilers, big wing on the back. I mean, really big wing on the back. I mean, if you've seen the V8 supercars in Australia, that's what mine looks like. But I when you drive a car like that, you can't be stupid. I mean, if I had a Mazda 121, I could drive like an idiot, and people wouldn't notice. But they tend to notice my car now. Rightly so too. It stands out like the proverbial. I even notice people filming my car when I drive on the freeway. Sort of like if you've seen the video of the Predator riding the motorcycle and people just film it, or like if you see the Mad Max pursuit car, the black one, it's, you know, from what do they call it in America, Road Warrior. If you see that car on the road, you'll film it. So people film my car now. It's actually pretty cool. Or I'll stop at a set of lights and they'll wind the window down and just go, yeah, look at that. It's pretty fun. One day I hope it's in good enough order to take it to show it. Take it to like car shows. That'd be nice. But the paint will never be good enough. I haven't got that kind of money. So it's sort of, you could sort of consider it almost like a modern day rat rod, because the paint is awful. But maybe I'll wrap it. Maybe it'll vinyl wrap. Anyway, it's not a car show. So the other thing that happened was the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down, and I was watching it on the news, and I'm mixed feelings about it. Right, I noticed all the scaffolding work, and I was reminded of how my friend's house was one day before moving in. All they had left was to polish the floorboards, and they had to sand them all down and then put a number of coats over. This was during the summer, so a number of coats, and not walk on it. So it wasn't one day, it was like a week away. Well, the tradesman who was doing the polished floors he first went over it with the sander to level it, and then went home. And when he came back the next day, the house was burnt to the ground because there was some electrical fault in the sander, and it caused a fire with all of the wood chips and the wood dust in it. It immediately combusted, and then the entire house burnt down, and the insurance had to pay for it to get it rebuilt again. That poor couple. So they were another like a year away from moving in. It was a pretty big house, and it was so terrible that no one noticed it was on fire. So, because they live on a property, so no one really noticed, and they weren't living on site, so they didn't know. No one noticed. Next day it was gone. The house was gone. So what I noticed, the first thing was that there was scaffolding work all around the cathedral, and my first thoughts were that it had burned to the ground because of an electrical problem to do with machinery that the people were using to renovate the building with. And everyone's going, oh, it's a sign of God, and all these tangents to it. And I'm just thinking, no, it's probably a machine or some kind of thing, electrical problem. And sure enough, that was the result. It looked really suspicious because they were taking all the things out of the building, but they were doing that to prepare it for the work. So that makes sense too. You would do that at that point. But in the beginning, we didn't know that it was under reconstruction already. But there's something really interesting about that whole thing. The plans to the actual building haven't been available for decades. They lost them years and years and years and years and years, decades ago. They lost the plans to the building. But wasn't that long ago a current game named Assassin's Creed, well, it's probably a couple of years old now, they'd scanned it with that 1,000,000 points of interest laser. And so they got a full inside picture of every single beam to the millimeter. Every beam, every window, everything, even the LED lighting, they were able to capture as a point of interest. That's what it's called, 1,000,000 points of interest. So like you can scan caves down to a millimeter, even with every single rocky protrusion, and then you can remap it from photographs, and it's photorealistic. I play a motorsport simulator where the tracks around the world were scanned with the same system down to a millimeter, and the accuracy on track is so extraordinary that if you drive it in real life, you're not surprised by anything at all. And in fact, they use that platform to train all the drivers, because you can't just go onto a racetrack, one that isn't say a permanent racetrack, ones that are constructed and then dismantled again. So you can go and you can train on those all year if you like, even though it's not even available. And in Australia, the big track is Bathurst, Mount Panorama, and that's only open for racing twice a year. So you can't train on it. It's a 60-kilometre-an-hour two-way street all year, except for 2 times, 2 small events. So it's only open for a week each as a racing track. So motorsport has been able to use the virtual world for training. Well, luckily that the Ubisoft game developers use that same thing to go in there and scan it, because now they're able to provide those plans to the people doing the reconstruction. That's awesome. I love that 1,000,000 points of interest thing. And what they've done is they've also decided to provide as a donation £500,000, which in Australian language is like 1.5 million. Got to times it by 2.5 for us, but maybe it's a different number for the American audience. It could be $1 million or something like that they've put towards it. Now that's not everything, but certainly that'll allow the deconstruction of the diagrams into components, and maybe material types or something like that. So I think it's well worth it. However, knowing that people are donating money and wanting to donate money towards the reconstruction of Notre Dame, the greatest shame is that there's 1 billion people starving in the world, or refugees maybe as part of a conflict. Towns need to be rebuilt because of war. I mean, like I said, they're starving across the globe. And where are those billionaires now? Saying, we'll pony up $1 billion to fix the cathedral for some reason. It's clearly a tax dodge, right? Giving to a charity, doesn't pay any taxes, you get tax dodge for doing it. Clearly Ubisoft is 500 million behind in their taxes or something. Right? Why would you do it otherwise? That's the question I ask. So, the poor people in Yemen that no one is interested at all in hearing about. The people in Yemen are getting bombed by the Saudis with US-made weapons because we're the little tiny, enthusiastic little brother of the US. So whatever you do, we do, because we're allies. So I feel for the Yemenis, if that's a word. I contribute to Doctors Without Borders. It's a way of doctors being able to fly around a planet and work in hospitals to help people, just that they need money to be able to pay the doctors and do all the admin behind it. I think it's a pretty good cause. However, Saudi Arabia bombed the hospital in Yemen, destroying it completely, and killed a whole bunch of Australian doctors. And that news story went straight to the bottom with, fluffy, funny cat videos on the day that it happened. I'm just making that bit up. I don't know what they replaced the story with, but it got buried beneath fluff. Because that, to me, is really important. And there is no media showing any of the Saudi actions in Yemen. I mean, what did the poor people of Yemen do? To me, it's the same as, what did the Palestinians do that Israelis hate them so bad? Where's that? How is that still a conflict? Surely there's no one left in Palestine who has done anything directly against Israel. Likewise, what is the motive behind Saudi Arabia's bombing of Yemen? What was America's, bombing of Syria? I mean, you weren't invited into it. Maybe you armed all the rebels in Turkey and pushed them across the border. And then who were you fighting? The people who now have the weapons after they killed the dudes? I don't know. But Russia was invited in. So that means anyone else in there is a foreign war person, foreign military. So are you allowed there? Just imagine if that happened in the US. Can you imagine if some country, I don't care who it is, China, right? I'm just randomizing this. So if China, or even India, I don't even care who it is, just some country, but I want to make them someone that you're going to be displeased with the answer. So it won't be the people from the North Pole, right? It won't be Santa Claus. It won't be scientists from Antarctica. I'm just thinking possibly not Russia, because Russia's been there, done that. But how about if it was China? If China was arming people and training them in Mexico and then pushing them across the border to topple your president. I'm sure there's some people on one particular side of politics in the US that would just let them go. I know they're right to go. Keep them going. Yeah, weapons doesn't matter. You can have weapons here. Just keep walking. You don't need a license apparently if you're going to do this. Can you imagine that? If it was is it LNC, the Hillary Clinton side, right? Whatever it is. So, if you think that's okay, that some country would be allowed to topple your government by arming troops outside of your borders and then throwing them across the border to fight your people, is that right? That sounds like war to me, right? So just be careful if you want to be... I don't want to get anyone off side. I'm really not trying to hate the US. I'm just saying there's so many... There's towns and starving and there's refugees, and I don't think these actions are positively assisting people so far. And if you're only believing what's in the media about why we should be there, maybe you should question if you'd like it to happen to you. Because I think we've lost empathy. I think that's one of the things that drives a nation to be good, is having empathy. If you have success, you can ignore it. But when you're not currently winning, what are you doing wrong? That's the big problem. China's billionaire Jack Ma this week put out a press release, or it was grabbed off his Twitter or something like that, right? And he said, and I'm misquoting him, but the gist of it is there. He says that the US debt crisis, he blames the US debt crisis on the perpetual war it involves itself in, spending trillions instead of on infrastructure. So you're spending trillions on war while your bridges need to get replaced and roads need to get upgraded and power systems and blah, blah, blah. Now, I took that two ways. One, the first way was, look, the guy's trying to make a name for himself. It's an easy media get. No one's really going to up front say, I think you're lying, right? They're not going to do that. They're not going to deny it. It's pretty true. I mean, it's pretty broad, but it's pretty true. Trillions, I probably believe that. They spend a lot of money on the war machine. Though, hasn't China been doing the same thing? Haven't they been building all of these little tiny islands and weaponizing them? And haven't they been going underground and putting all their bases underground? Because they learnt from the US, underground's the best way to go. Because where is it? Who knows? Don't even know. And if you're building all your stuff underground and making tunnels so that you can have a retaliation attack against your foe, that you can, like an ant's nest, some kid goes up to an ant's nest, especially in this country. You don't want to go up to a big mound of, looks like gravel, right? Fine gravel with holes in it, and stand on the gravel, because that's the actual ant's nest itself, and poke it with a stick. Because once you start poking with a stick, they're going to come out of every single hole in the ground and surround you and start biting you. And I don't mean like it's discomforting to be bitten by an ant that makes that. I think they're bull ants. Bull ants' nest is what we know them as. And they'll continue to sting you. They're not the jumping jack ants that can see you that used to be wasps, that have a wasp sting. That where I live, they're here. No, they have wars. These ants, bull ants have wars, and they have territory. And you'll never see two of these ants' nests within, I don't know, like 30 meters of each other. They won't be closer than that because that's the extent of their boundary. Something else. So you wouldn't do that. And I know China's been building all of this stuff itself, but this isn't like, what do you call it when you're trying to hide what you do but make a note of the other person's doing of the same thing? Because that's what I think that is. I really think that Jack Ma was trying to big note himself and get a message out there because he's like a well-known person. And this quick grab that they've taken actually says more about China than it does of the US. Made me think a lot more. Made me think about all of the other stories I've seen. It made me think about the China, India, and another country who are fighting over this little triangle of land that they've been warring against each other. China's attempted not to invade. Remember when Taiwan was warned that if it was to join the US's opinion, that it would be bombed by China? Like, they can't say they don't threaten people. They can't say they're not warring. I know that they say that they're currently not involved in war, but what they are involved in is a slow takeover of the planet, where eventually they'll just own everything. I think that if a certain amount of anyone in the world bought stock in what you could call the majority owned American stocks, but only just enough to use the least amount of money per person, and then on whatever day you choose to plan to do it on, sell them. That'll cause our computers to go in a debt spiral, no, a downward spiral, not a debt spiral, a downward spiral, and try to recover as much as it could, and it would just continue to sell, forcing all the value of the stock to be lost. And you could trigger that. I mean, it's well known that could happen. I know there's some safeguards that have been put in, but no one wants to really lose money. So if you could do this on a big enough scale, you would force all of the computers to sell. Therefore, another depression. You could do that. I mean, you really could do it. So the other story I wanted to talk about was, you're not going to find very much on it, but if you start to Google, you see some more and more evidence here and there. Now, it's almost taboo to mention any Mediterranean types of people who might not be doing the right thing. It's almost taboo. You're not allowed to say that there's a specific people on the planet that have their own religious beliefs that don't sort of line up with the West. I think you're all with me on this. If I was to say it, it would end up being dictated and my channel would be taken offline. So I'm not trying to do that. My point of this is, in Sri Lanka today, there are explosions heard at hotels and churches. And so far, there's heaps of people wounded, but 20 dead. Now, I'm not saying that it's not a tit for tat thing. I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know the origin of it specifically. But when these stories are coming out, that it wasn't Sri Lankans that were killing themselves, it was somebody else, and they were targeting the churches. Now, I think that's awful. No one should attack anyone's place of worship, and I don't care what it is. I don't care if they're a big grasshopper, or if it's the straw man or the wicker man, or you're just into atheism. I don't care. If you get a group of enough people together, then you're sort of worshipping something, right? There shouldn't be any reason to attack people doing that, unless you consider this period of time like the New Crusades, where we're actively, some people are actively, not we, but some people are actively seeking out to dismantle, disrupt, bring into array or awry, because it's a fray when you beat on someone with hands, into like some kind of religious war. I don't care what color hat you wear. I'm not going to beat on anybody because of that. I don't care, because the way I see it, everything other than the Anunnaki Sumerian texts that have been, described to the Sumerians by the Anunnaki, who then left the planet after doing their do. They did the did. They did the do, and they left. And they left us with our origin story. Unless you're talking about that specific text, then what are you talking about with your religion? I'm not saying you're wrong, because I think the religion is certainly required. Maybe it's not as required as much as it used to during the darker periods of our knowledge, going back centuries. Maybe it was better then because it was less schooling, so there was more churching. But now we have more schooling, so there could be less church. Now, if it all comes to pass that there was truly aliens that came down to make us, and that you ever learnt that the translations were incorrect, if you ever learnt that the story that you'd believed in didn't quite match the real account, or if they just came down and said, oh, actually it was just us anyway, oh, who knows about the God thing, we still believe there's something, but good luck. Good luck with that. But if you're arguing over a specific wording in any particular text of any religious document, it was just created at some time. It wasn't the original story. Oh, burn me at the stake if you disagree. Not literally, figuratively. I'm not a heretic. I'm not saying that what you believe in is wrong. I'm just saying, you would probably be best to question your text and do your research into what the Anunnaki passed down to the Sumerians. And you'll see how much of this lines up. In fact, it lines up and it predates it. And this is the unaltered version. And yours went through 7 languages to get to the English version of that same story. And I did a piece a little while ago about Born in the USA, the song Born in the USA. And I translated it word for word, word specific, from each of those languages that the current Bible had been translated through to get to the current one in English. And coming from the wording and going through all of it, all of the meaning was lost. Like, for instance, born in a dead man's town. We know what that means because we have a reference to what a dead man's town means. It means a town that's going nowhere, it's dwindling in people, and there's no hope left there in that town. You're best to move on. Yeah? But born in a dead man's town, it translated to born in the town of the dead. But that doesn't have the same connotation. It just means it sounds like the town itself is dead. It's dead, not dying. And the wording was so different that it didn't make the same sense as it does in our minds when we hear it. We didn't have an emotional attachment to it. It just, wow, oh, okay, that's not the same. So if it's not the same, then how was it deciphered through the languages who maybe didn't have a word for that thing they were trying to describe? So they got really close, and as close as you can get in that single translation, then it was translated again, and maybe they didn't have that word for it, so they got really close again. But each time they did that, the message changed. The ultimate message changed. So, look, it's really tough. I'm not particularly religious myself. I understand the needs of it. I understand all of what it means. And not just the single Christianity. I understand what the others mean, and I understand what it meant to society when it was introduced. I understand what the terminology meant, the outcomes, the reasons for those lines, and what it meant for the society at the time. But since the society has moved on and grown past some of those phrases and phrasing, just like today, don't hate me, but figuratively and literally are now the same definition in the dictionary. They weren't, and we know one literally means actually. So if I said I'm jumping with joy, it means I'm actually jumping up and down with joy. I was literally jumping with joy. But if I say I was figuratively jumping for joy, it's just something that I've imposed upon myself, but maybe I was a bit too tired and I just thought about it. I didn't do it. So one is the description of not doing it, and the other one is the description of actually doing it. But now in the dictionary, because of people's poor understanding of both of those words, they've now been lumped into the same description, and they're just the same thing now. So going back to the Bible and going back to the other religious texts, saying that those transitions from each one of those languages at the time and at the time when they were made, extrapolate what you need to from that. They made changes to the text, so they made sense in that language, but they're moving on to the next one. I had a neighbour of mine, he was Greek, a lovely guy, and I learned a lot about food idioms. And he says, you're a carrot. I'm not red-headed. I'm not orange. Do I have green hair? I don't understand. And from his point of view, it made total sense. And he would say, not turn off the light, turn on the light. Oh, close the light. He would say, close the light. And I'm thinking, close the circuit. Closing the circuit turns it on. Closing the light, maybe turn off the light? Do you mean turn off? He goes, yeah, close the light. Okay, so we'll turn the light off. So if turn off and close are what we both say to do the same thing, a translation is extremely explicit in requiring a phrase that requires that description. And if it doesn't have the exact wording, the meaning is lost. I hope you get where I was going with that. I think I overstated it, but anyway. All I don't want is a new Crusades. I don't want religious war. I don't want any war, for that matter. You know, if suddenly war was on with another country like China or just someone, right? I think that would be extremely disappointing, and I'd be looking at our leaders and remarking to myself at how they'd failed. Because this is probably it is the most dangerous time since we began nuclear weapons, according to the world clock. It's a very difficult time to live, and I held a lot more account. I held to account my trust in the politicians and the geopolitics to get their stuff together to make it a better place. And every day that it isn't a better place, the pure blame is on the current leaders, because they're the ones that are doing it. It's so easy, but they've got an agenda. And look, let's just hope it isn't Agenda 21, where none of all of the things that I've mentioned today make any difference to anyone, given that if Agenda 21 is the real thing and there's only 500 million people that is meant to be here after the S has hit the fan, and that the things that they've wanted to do, they've enacted, they've pushed the play button, they've run it all. As soon as the program's running, if it isn't already, then we're just useless eaters. Think about that for a minute. So would that explain away their awful actions, their behavior? Would that explain to you enough of a cause for them to have treated maybe our trust in them with disdain? I mean, how can they do that? It's not just about playing games. It's not just about donating money to the other side so that you can get something in, some kind of favor, maybe oil. We'll give you some humanitarian money if you let us in there to drain your oil resources. I'm sure that was a thing. Anyway, look, you're listening to Shiny Side Out with only Dave today, and I'm going to lift it up after the hour. What I do like to do is discuss things at length, but look, it's because it's only my voice. I know I get just a little dark, but I'll show you the light at the end of this, because one of the segues through here was back to the Giants topic, and I spoke about the Anunnaki already. Let's see. Someone in the chat room tell me when the music started. I can't hear it. There it is. All right. I'll see you after the break, a very short break, and take the time to donate. Listen to Shine Side Out with Dave.
.com, 100% listeners supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with Dave and Meckie's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button on the website or subscribe to the archives for only $5 or $5.95, depending on what country you're in, per month. You know what? It's a cost of, for me, it's a cost of a double shot coffee and a Turkish bread with Vegemite and peanut butter on alternate sides pushed together. It tastes like salty peanuts. It's really good. That sounds like breakfast to me. 3 days a week at least. I'd like to say hello, and hey, you should try it too, by the way. It's pretty good. Some people like Vegemite and avocado. I've seen that too, or Vegemite and cheese, or just smashed avocado, or avos, smashed avo on toast. That's pretty good too. But that's where my $6 goes. So $5.95. That's only one breakfast a month, surely. You've got enough spare change to be able to donate to the station. Please do, because there's so many servers, and Hawk does, I still don't know how he does it, to be honest. Does a bang up job. It's fantastic. Keeps the platform alive. Not only does he have a website, but he's got servers to be able to facilitate the radio component of it, and also spread out virtualized servers to be able to disseminate this information out to you on any of the platforms that it comes out on. So thank you very much. A big thank you to Nighthawk, but don't forget, it all comes back to you, the listener. So please subscribe. It's the easiest way to be able to provide a donation towards the station. But if you just want to buy something from the station, you can get there's promotions, but he's a tremendous woodworker. You should see the work that he does. You can just buy some of those items. You can get like a EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents on it. Hopefully, if there's an EMP, if there is an EMP, that you can still use your computer to be able to read the documents. I would suggest getting it and printing out what you can and making a book from it. That's the best way you could move forward. I've purchased a number of gardening books gardening and farming books that allow me to be able to reference something, because the internet is most likely not going to be there. I tried to talk to my children about this and said, what would you do if you were the only person on the planet? Like, you woke up and there were no other humans around, specifically your mum and dad or your sister for that matter. And I said, what would you do? And they said, well, you probably wake up and be a little scared that was no one here. We'd call out for you and try and find you. This is jointly their communication to me when I asked the question. They'd noticed that the car was still here, rather than, because it's usually where I am, wherever I am, my car is with me. And they would say, okay, well, the car is here, maybe he's just gone for a walk. And they'd call out and soon discover there was no other people around. You might see fires. So if you imagine in what scenario would people just vanish and they'd still be alive? Imagine if and I ran some silly scenario where aliens came and abducted everyone, but they just forgot you because you weren't on the list. It was an administrative error, a clerical error, where they just skipped over your name and forgot, and then and left you behind for some reason. And they said, well, probably go to the shops and steal a bunch of stuff, right? And I said, yeah, well, if we're the only ones here, then it's not going to matter. And I said, well, what would you steal first? What would you eat first? And then they said, lollies. And I said, no, go for the ice cream. The ice cream's the first to spoil. It'll be the last time you'll ever have it. So you want it to be fresh on your mind for a while and get the brain freeze. I was sort of surprised that they thought about, because they're too young to drive. They thought, we'll probably just, steal a car and drive around, because why not? You can just drive any car you want. You could probably stay in any person's house you wanted, even go to a, extremely rich area where people live in massive mansions, and you could live in one of those for a while. But, that would be short-lived, because you'd still be after food and water. If there's no electricity, there's no pumps, then your water pressure from the taps is going to be useless, and you won't be able to get anything but, bore water if you're lucky. Otherwise, harvested rainwater would be the go, but you're going to have to put bleach in it, in the source, so that you can have good drinking water. And I went through all these things, and I kept thinking how close that was to a survival situation where some houses today in Australia would still have power because they'd have a battery source and they'd have solar panels, and you'd be able to operate water from a tank. But sewage would back up because the plants wouldn't be operating. And I said, the power might last 6 hours from the disappearance of all the humans, because the coal-fired power plants would still be burning coal but losing energy over time. And the nuclear plants, well, they need constant tinkering here and there to make sure they don't go into an overrun of reaction. And the new ones, if it senses it, they drop the carbon rods and suspend the reaction. But the older ones had a manual thing, and I said there'd be meltdowns all over the place because electricity was required to run it. And if the coal-fired or otherwise renewable energy sources ceased, the only power that the plant would have would be the plant's power itself. And if it faltered at all, then you'd be in grief. If the water cooling clogged up and there was no maintenance, then certainly the northern hemisphere would become unlivable through the amount of contamination. Imagine the building fires and no one to put them out. There'd be massive fires. You think about home appliances that would have been running or melted down or something. Maybe the power surge. I don't know. But if there was a fire at all, a gas fire or something that happened, maybe just a lightning storm goes through and sparks up some fire, right? Maybe someone's gas was left on and maybe it blew out because the windows were open and a storm came through. You know, all these different scenarios are all completely possible. The Northern Hemisphere would be pretty much toast. It would be unlivable. You'd be able to live from house to house when canned food and after the perishables are gone, but you really need to plant stuff on from day one, so that 6 months in that you're starting to get some food source from it. It was an odd discussion. It all came about because I was watching some YouTube channel and my daughters came in and said, look, Dad, you got to watch this. And then at the end of it, I said, well, how did this come to mind? How did you get to this topic? And they said, oh, yeah, well, they brought it up at school and then they showed us this video and watched this video. And so I watched it. And it seemed like a university student or a high school student, at least senior year student, had put together a video with some flash animation. It was pretty good. But it was really high level and it didn't have much of the negativity. It was all sort of brushed over. And that's how I could tell its intended audience was kids rather than the dark, gloomy side that I tend to focus on. But only from a realist point of view. I don't dwell in it. I'm not down in the weeds for no reason. I'm only there to understand that they exist. And that comes about from a long history of having to deal with these kinds of things. Certainly in my family we had, and we still do to this day, and I've propagated that, or promulgated that through our family, so that I'm carrying on the same legacy that my parents did. And that was, we had code words for certain events. So if one of us was to understand, say a tsunami was coming, the only word we need to know is not tsunami, it's just high ground. You just text someone high ground, you message them high ground, you call them and say the code word and hang up. You don't need any other detail. Then that's the plan. So we have a plan called high ground and we have to act on it. You don't question anyone, you just get about your business and get it done. And when you've successfully completed your plan, you're in a safe position, you've got all the things you need, and then we wait it out. Then we have a rendezvous point afterwards, because it's going to come and go. If there was a meteor, think about all the different kinds of scenarios. So you might have one, you might develop one for yourselves. You might develop one called, EMP, or just have a groovy name for it. So if someone overhears it, you go, what? What's that? You could use old ones that we all know about, Operation Paperclip or High Jump or things like that. That's where High Ground came from. It was one of those styled naming conventions. Just make a compound word from two things. Make it interesting and make it something you'll always remember, and make it something you'll never normally say in conversation, so it can never be misconstrued. Make it also you should also have a duress statement. Something that if you were in duress, say gun to your head, and forced to call your family about something, that you just say this phrase. Doesn't matter. It's like when we went on holidays last year. That's all you have to say. It doesn't have to be much. Just a hint that the other people know what's going on. And that the people on the, with the gun to your head don't understand what it means. You say, I've got a gun to my head. Or, at Jason's 10-year-old birthday party. Yeah. So you find the thing that connects you to it, because that'll be what has more buy-in in your family. Anyways, so despite that, I found the video touched on only the things that would make a kid super interested in hearing this stuff and discovering, I could do anything. I could just, a bit of the Will Smith movie. I could just hit golf balls off the top of a building. Who would bother with that, right? I could drive a fast car around. But there's going to be all the other cars on the road that were just stuck there because people were sucked out of them, right? Somehow. because I'm sure it just didn't happen at night when everyone was asleep and all the cars were neatly parked on the side of the road. If suddenly on the freeway, you know, you're doing 110 kilometers an hour, right, 60 miles an hour or whatever, and people get sucked out of their cars, it's going to be cars ruined everywhere. It was such a preposterous idea that this person was putting forward, like it was the sunshine and lollipops version of an end of the world scenario. But do you know what I thought? My take-home message from it was, they're showing this to kids. They're lining the kids up for an event. This is radioing ahead at its best. It's sort of like when I bought the trampoline for my kids. What a trampoline. It's a Vuli, V-U-L-Y brand. And so I'm not lying. Go on their website and have a look at the actual mat of the trampoline. There's a puppy, there's an ice cream, there's like a flame, and there's, I can't remember all the icons, but it's sort of split into 50-50. Halfway is like a mirror image, or it's half of it is populated with icons and there's the same kind of icons found on the other side. Maybe it's so kids can play a game. You know, maybe they yell out fire and they can only jump on the fire icons or something like that, right? But there's a grey alien face on it. This is for children. When I was growing up, there wasn't, you know, Invasion of the Body Snatchers icon on my trampoline. I didn't have a trampoline, my friend's trampoline. We had no money. I had no money. I got a hammer once for a birthday party, for my birthday, from my parents. Hammer. Right? So I had nothing. I'm not saying I'm poor, I'm just saying we had nothing. And I didn't get very many gifts at all. What I did get, though, I cherished, and I became pretty good at carpentry, right? I like it as a result. It was a good thing. My dad had been through trades to get into where he got to, and so he went through all of that, and that was pretty tough for us living. We weren't the middle class. We were like the upper lower class, right? We weren't middle class. My mum loved to think that we were happily in the middle class somewhere, but we would have been either lower middle class or upper lower class. If there's such a thing, I don't know. People like to think perpetually that there is no class system, there's no classes at all, but they're widening so broadly, and the middle is getting cored so that there is truly this, for want of a better word, it's a widening gap between the poor and the rich are getting richer. And as the Australian band Midnight Oil say, the poor get the picture. So the rich getting richer, the poor get the picture. The bombs never hit you when you're down so low. It means that you can only ever be the working poor. The working poor, and everyone else is wealthy. Well, you'll only ever work for wealthier people than you, if that makes sense. I remember growing up, when I grew up, it was all about, you can have anything. If you can dream it, you can be it. You can be it. Let's see, that sounds like a Rocky Horror Picture Show song. But you could, if you could aspire to it and come up with it, if you could do it, then it was possible. It was all there for you. You could achieve your goals. You could have the house with 2.3 children. You could be as wealthy as you wanted to be. You could have what you wanted if you worked for it. I worked very, very hard. Long hours. I've done shift work. I've worked really long hours. I've worked in very manual labor styled operations, you know, blue collar, then white collar. I've gone up to supervisor and then into the management roles. And do you know what makes me happy? Being the person that can make things happen, fixing things, making people happy, being able to talk to people and having whatever their wishes are come true. Like, not the Santa Claus, but I like to be in a role where I can supply something that gets done. It achieves something. I don't know. I think I could still work in a cannery, though. I could still watch a million cans go past and not get bored. I'd still come home, I think, and I'd still be able to be happy. Because happy is not related to money. Happy is related to how you live your life when you're not working. And the only happiness I could find was when I was working. But now I think I've got a renewed happiness now. I've been working in my car and having some fun. But look, I'm not on the couch here, and I'm not being asked, now what about your mother? None of that. Very pleased to know where we're at, what's going on. I'm glad that my eyes are open. I'm glad that, and I'm pleased that I've been able to find this platform that Meki and I we found. In all of these people, we were able to hook up, and we've got a show. I like that. I like that, like-minded people. I've got a family. I like where I'm at, but I'd also like where I'm at if I was in any other position. Either the red or the blue pill. Even if I didn't know all the stuff I knew, I'd still be happy because I didn't know that I wasn't happy. That makes sense? The only thing that I think that that life teaches you is that everything is inevitable. There isn't anything that is truly a great surprise. There shouldn't be. And if there is, maybe you're going in the wrong way. Maybe you're pointed in the wrong direction. Don't look backwards. I saw a really funny thing. It's a bit of a car meme. But on your driver's side mirror, that it says, everything in the mirror, are closer than they appear. Well, I saw one, because I'm into racing cars. I'm into racing. I'm competitive. And it said, everyone in the mirror is losing. I love it. That's just fantastic. All right, so moving on. I don't have any other news to talk about other than what the real show is all about. And I want to get through a couple of topics here. This is show number 371. Meki would say, what would he say? He would say 170 and 300. This is part 4 of the Giants topics that we were talking about and have been talking about in the last 3 shows prior. Make sure everything's working. Yep. And the question that keeps coming up, that since we've realized now that according to the Sumerian text passed down from the Anunnaki, that they'd set the human age limit at 120 years. However, when you look at the Preluvian or the pre-flood people, that there was 700 years, for instance, of lifespan. So just recapping, that if we were able to live to 700 years, the 100-year point would be a seventh of our lifespan. So if you're, say you're 49 and your child is 7 years old, that's the difference. So think about this. You're 49 years old, 7 sevens are 49. Hang on, now I'm questioning myself. Are they 49? I think they are. No, they'd be 48, wouldn't they? Surely my calculator can't fail me now. 7 times 7. Yep, I was right, 49. So if you're a 49-year-old adult and you have a 7-year-old child, what do you consider they don't know yet? Heaps, right? How much more mature are you than the 7-year-old? Consider living to 700 and having a 100-year-old in front of you who was going to live to 700 as well. You would consider them as immature, I suspect, or unknowing, are probably the better word, one who doesn't know yet, you would consider them the same as you're 49 and you have a 7-year-old. Now, don't argue that they've only been alive 7 years and they're still a child and they've got more growing to do. But we're asking this question: how much taller would we continue to grow to if we were to get to 700 years? Given that the max growth period is between, say, 10 and 20. That's when we grow to maturity. If that was stretched out over 40 years instead of 10, or maybe 7 times bigger, then maybe we'd get to 12 foot, 14 foot tall, possibly, right? So we're much loftier than we were, say, 150 years ago. How has this happened? Asks Adam Hadhazy. And what will people look like a century from now? This was published back in 14th of May 2015. Humankind has transformed in the last century and a half. Our global population has soared from a mere billion to more than 7 billion. I think we're just hitting 7.7 billion right now. In developed countries, average life expectancy has skyrocketed from 45 years in the mid-1800s to about 8 years nowadays. And we've even changed physically. A good chunk of our species is now taller than it's ever been. The average human height has gone up in industrialized countries, ranging from the United Kingdom to the United States and Japan, where gains are up to 10 centimeters. 10 centimeters. That's what, 6 inches or so? But for height gains over the last 150 years, one nation stands head and shoulders above all others. Mind the pun. Today, young Dutch men and women are on average around 184 centimetres and 170 centimetres in height. That's men and women respectively. Both on average, mind you. That's 19 centimetres taller than their mid-century counterparts. That's a good number to shock people with. That's nearly 20 centimetres, says John Komlos, professor of economic history in the University of Munich. Why have humans in general, and the Dutch in particular, got taller? Does this altitudinous trend show any sign of continuing? And, for that matter, where might it end? Will our descendants living on space stations or on other worlds look upon earthbound ancestors as hobbits? Does a body good? Questions such as these inspired Komlos back in the 1980s as he pioneered the field of anthropometric history. That's a history of people's heights. It explores how the waxing and waning in a population's average stature varies according to economic and social conditions. In particular, Komlos dug through archives of governmental military records which happen to track soldiers' heights to explore the relationship. The research revealed that the literal ups and downs of individual human height closely track variations in 2 factors: diet and disease, particularly where these 2 factors are at work during childhood. If children do not get enough food to eat or cannot absorb nutrients because of diarrheal illness, oh, that just sounds awful, doesn't it? I don't want any of that. Say their chances of sprouting into their full potential adult height are greatly diminished. You know, if genetics wasn't entirely apportioned to height, and I look back at my school pals and the shortest ones, I now feel really sorry for them, because maybe they had like the turbo lax the 2 feet off the ground straight out in front of them kind of experiences. My goodness me, the poor things. Bottom line, says William Leonard, a professor of anthropology at Northwestern University in Illinois, the major drivers behind increased adult stature and improved nutrition, health, and in general a better quality of life. Goodness me. A lot of stuff going on here in the room. I've got some friends over, and one of my friends, Dave, has just dropped into the studio here with me. He's trying to find the correct seating because I had a seat just pushed across behind me, which was actually broken, and he chose that seat by pure mistake. And I heard the crunching sound, so that's not the right seat to sit on. But we've got a
better now.
Yeah, much better. We've got a footrest there. He's sitting on that. History is replete with examples of this height-health link in the Western European late medieval period, after the Black Death had wiped out as much as 60% of the population. The survivors found they had access to plentiful food and uncrowded living conditions, both of which kept disease spread in check. People could thus grow relatively tall, with Englishmen just 4 centimetres on average shorter than their fellow countrymen today. Goodness me. I know that if you have goldfish, like a single goldfish in a tank, it'll grow to the size it can because of the food. But if you overcrowd it during its growth, it won't successfully grow to its true size, and that's not because of lack of food. That's because it felt confined, and so it didn't try to be the biggest one in the tank. It's like a sherry thing. So the Black Death, and devoid of 60% of the population, might have given people the ability to feel as though they could grow to their true potential as well. I think there's still environmental. There's also biological and physical ways for it to occur as well. But in the 17th century Europe, heights hit a low point. The average Frenchman then stood no taller than 162 centimetres. Severely cold winters due to the Little Ice Age, which is well documented, slashed crop yields. Conflict broke out all over, from the English Civil War to the wars of Louis the 14th of France, and then there's the 30 Years' War in what became Germany. Europe just kind of tore itself apart in the 17th century, says Comlos. I've got a quick question for my counterpart here. Dave, Age of Thrones, was it Age of Thrones? No.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, that's the one I was looking for. What century is that supposed to be in? It's like the Dark Ages, isn't it?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I thought it was around the same period. Like the Black, like it's fictional, but it's not like the Black Death is coming, right? It's not a true history.
No, yeah. I'm pretty sure it was set way back, but I don't know how far back.
Well, I like there's dragons in it.
Yeah. I don't watch it for the dragons.
There's plenty of other reasons to watch it, but dragons is like third on the list for me. The 18th century Industrial Revolution, which saw people packed into disease-ridden slums in cities, similarly stunted the populace. By the latter part of the 19th century, though, the social upheaval had borne the fruit of improved agriculture production, running water, and urban sanitation. Thank heavens for that. Otherwise, they're just tipping their feces out in the street. As well as expanding economic prosperity, the Western Europeans shot up the growth charts and kept doing so for decades. This height-health link is still starkly visible today. I think people are much, much taller today. There's so many more tall people. Like, it's crazy. Like, if you have a look back, I don't know, back in the 80s at like basketball players, and now today, they take like 3 steps and they're down the court. It's like, what? And they reach down to put it in, put the ball into the hoop. I'm making a joke to make a point. This height health link is okay. So The North ranks 188 out of 195 countries on the United Nations Human Development Index. I didn't even know there was such a thing, a HDI it's called. A metric of life expectancy, income and education. North Korean adult male height lags 3 centimeters to 8 centimeters behind the equivalent figures for their South Korean counterparts, whose country holds the HDI's 15th spot as of, well, that was back in 2014. Yet, in some industrialized countries, notably the United States, the height gains since the 19th century have actually leveled off. From the 18th century Revolutionary War through World War II in the mid-20th century, Americans towered above the industrialized folks, but today American men typically notch up about 176 and women 163 centimeters. 176 is like, what, 5'11". Approximately the same height as that of the average hippie who attended Woodstock 45 years ago. Hey man, how tall are you? Hey, do you know how many jelly beans I can fit in my mouth? And the guy goes, nah. Yeah, neither do I. I just wanted to know if someone else knew. And look, that height is also well behind the Dutch. The average height today in the US is not appreciably different than it was in the mid to late 70s, even the late 60s, says Leonard. We're talking about 40 to 50 years of relative plateau. How have Northern Europeans pulled ahead? Komlos strongly believes that unequal access to nutrition and healthcare in the US compared to more socialized systems, ooh, there's a call, in advanced European nations is the difference maker. Oh, so he's saying socialism gets you taller. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Wow. That's quite the criticism, isn't it, on democracy? But anyway, we'll see. Millions of Americans lack medical insurance and do not see doctors regularly. Pregnant women are afforded little aid in the States, whereas in Holland, they get home visits from nurses absolutely free, says Komlos. In addition, a third of Americans are obese, thanks in part to eating too much junk food. Calorie-dense, processed foods can shave centimeters off consumers' growth. Oh, I suppose the growth is lateral, not vertical. I know, I'm suffering that. Oh, I've got to change my diet.
You and me both.
Yeah. Hey, I've done the challenge, the live on the rations of a refugee, a Syrian refugee. And it's a week's lot of food in a box about the size of a box of wine. Oh, a whole week. And if I have 5 people donate money to the cause, I get a tea bag. Single tea bag.
Who gives you the tea bag?
Oh, I'm allowed to supply that myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the reason why I'm going to do it to the letter is so I can say so there if anyone argues that I don't know what it's like. I can go, well, I've done it. I did it. It's good. It's good. But it's like lentils and rice and some flavor oil or something. Oh, I'd prefer just to eat flour. Plain flour. Oh, it's going to be really tough. So look, I expect I'm going to lose some weight. Maybe that's my kickoff point. Where was I? So owing to the developmental and metabolic issues, the Coca-Cola, hamburger, McDonald's diet is not going to bring you up to the Dutch level, to put it simply, says Komlos. Height gains in the US have not kept pace with Europe, is the take-home message there. And look, we have to say this, don't forget genes. So far, we've looked at nurture rather than nature's part in height attainment. As with almost any human trait, however, genetics do play a huge role. In fact, they play most of the role. You can diminish from it by negatively attributing your environment to it. So Even so, the recent gains in human height in certain populations cannot be chalked up to evolution selecting for taller genes, because the reason for that is the selection would be the woman's role to only find suitably tall men, leaving behind the short men. And that natural selection isn't occurring, where all the short men are joining a group by saying, why can't I get a girlfriend that's taller than me, right? They're not in that Facebook group. So, in fact, from a pure Darwinian perspective of fitter organisms producing more offspring, the opposite is happening in modern Homo sapiens. Impoverished, less healthy, and thus typically shorter families tend to have more children than prosperous families. Niger, one of the world's poorest and least developed nations, that'd be like Nigeria or something, also has the world's highest total fertility, with women often bearing more than 7 children. Look worldwide, he says, and the vast majority of human or height variation is due to differences in socio-economic status and nutritional well-being, says Leonard. Rather than natural selection from genetic viewpoints, today's record heights speak to genes getting all they desire from maximally performing their developmental jobs. The major changes we have seen over the last century and a half in height are due to populations now being able to achieve their genetic potential in height, or more closely approximate it, than was the case previously, says Leonard. The big lesson, says Komlos, is that the environment puts its stamp on the human body. It's just not genetics. So that's what I was saying. So the take-home message here is you'll grow to your potential if you've, like a plant with hydroponics, is given all of the nutrients all the time, and it uses whatever it can and becomes the biggest plant it can. Unfortunately, some of the foods and our environment and illnesses can detract from our total height, reducing our height according to our genes. So someone who isn't, say someone's 5'10" or 5'11", they might, I got my hand up, they might be able to have grown to 6 foot, depending on their circumstances. And if they married someone that was 6 foot tall, they would have 100% chance of having someone 6 foot tall if they were both 6 foot, and their genetics, they reach their maximum. But their children may not, because of nutrition, some kind of illness effect, or other things that might contribute it to them. So look, I think it makes sense. But the question is, what's the allure of the tall? Good question. All that being said, it's worth noting that the high stature is a sign of attractiveness across many cultures. Height also serves as a strikingly reliable gauge of earning potential. An often cited 2004 study found that for each extra inch of height above average, someone could expect to earn per working year of his or her life up to $780 more. $789 to be honest. About $976 in today's money, or 625 pounds. That's really not very much. It's not even $1,000. It's not very much at all, to be honest. It's almost no difference. But, hey, good to be tall, I suppose. This tallness benefit does cut off, though. Height clearly does not linearly correlate with wealth. Athletes and famous fashion models aside, multimillionaire CEOs are not all colossuses. Komlos says the benefit tapers off in the vicinity of about 190 centimeters as people go from aesthetically tall to, well, eyebrow-raisingly tall, like basketball players. Instead of a blessing, extreme height can be a curse. Lanky people have to stoop through doorways and struggle to fit in cars. Taller folks are more prone to certain maladies as well, such as joint and cardiovascular problems. Robert Wadlow, sorry about that, Robert, officially the tallest man ever to have lived, is a prime example. A pituitary gland disorder made him soar to 2.72 meters. That's 8'11" in the US speak. He had to wear leg braces as he got older in order to walk. An infected blister from a poor-fitting brace contributed to Wadlow's death, and he was only aged 22.
Yeah, like a size 20 shoe.
Oh, it's crazy, yeah. Imagine being a swimmer, you dive in, you've hit the wall. You sort of then you have to turn, just go backwards and forwards in the pool, lengthways.
He did his turn.
He could... Yeah, that's really funny. Given these considerations and the recent historical run of height gains, Comlis thinks humankind has probably reached its population level pinnacle. The Dutch, to me, he says, gives you the maximum for a human population. They're just about as tall as we can be under optimal conditions, like the hydroponic plant versus the naturally grown plant, where not all the nutrients were available in the soil when it needed it. Leonard agrees, though. He says, I think, by and large, populations of the industrial world are increasingly sort of reaching the thresholds of our genetic potential. Wow, gee, how drifty was his sentence. He could have just said, I agree with you. I think we might be hitting our potential. Achieving new heights. As we've indeed topped off terrestrially, what about extraterrestrially? Could people living in space or on other worlds somehow end up taller than conventional Earthlings? Before I read on, I'm going to say absolutely. In 0 Gs, we wouldn't have the compressional strength restricting our height growth, and our bones, while they may be thinner and not require the strength that we'd need under 1G, we'd probably be taller and lankier and considerably weaker.
Your muscle structure would be less dense.
Absolutely, as well. That's right. We know we lose bone density when we're in space. It just happens because your body goes, I don't need any of that. Yeah, let's put that to work somewhere else, wherever that is. Right? Maybe it's just the poor nutrition that the poor people get in space as well isn't helping them at all. Yes. Yeah, where's that high protein milk? Where's the cow? I want to see the cow in space. That's what I want to see.
That'd be messy.
Yeah, where are you going to get all the lawn for it to eat as well? That's another problem. This notion of non-earthly lifestyles altering humans' forms frequently pops in science fiction. In Kim Stanley Robinson's award-winning Mars trilogy, for instance, we colonize the red planet supposedly owing to Mars's gravity being only 38% of that of Earth's. Within a couple of generations, humans born and raised as Martians tower over their grandparents. Well, that would make sense, totally. While we won't know for sure until we set up shop elsewhere, as in, like, they should have already done it. Should have had the first person give birth in space and raise a child there. And as The Simpsons, raise them purely only in the space station in like a silo or something. And I suspect that they're going to harbour a resentment against NASA for having lived in a silo in space. A deep resentment against their captors. So just a few months of living aboard the International Space Station is essentially weightless conditions leaves humans several centimetres taller, albeit temporary. That's only because of the non-compression of the vertebrae, the padding between our spinal. It's the little cushions in our spine get to expand out normally. We also get a very temporary effect of just sleeping during the night. If you measure yourself the moment you wake up and measure yourself in height, as compared to the afternoon when you get home, you're taller in the morning. The extra height goes away after a few days, back planet side. That's like stateside. It's a very war speak, that one. The increased height occurs because the jelly-like cushioning into I say actually it's the discs in the astronauts' spines fill with fluid and expand. They actually said that. I can skip past all of that. The situation on Mars with its plentiful gravity compared to the ISS would not be as bad. Then again, colonists would probably intend to live on the red planet permanently. These brave homesteaders might well suffer from backache as a consequence, but these pains might pale next to the other known low-gravity medical issues, including bone mass loss and skewed endocrine systems. Rather than evolve into giants, Martians might be a bit infirm, like old people, like urine-soaked mattresses. It comes to mind. Support for this prediction comes from Leonard's studies of populations on Earth living in extreme environments, such as high up in the Andes Mountains or in the frigid Siberian high Arctic. These stressful conditions, Leonard says, translate into the body using proportionally more of its energy just for maintenance, instead of growth. Accordingly, folk in these regions do not tend to be tall. Colonizing a whole new planet would certainly be stressful. Well, if it was anything like the movie, it would be entirely stressful having to live by yourself. Good on you. Mars is a frozen desert with no breathable air. All food production and living would have to happen inside shelters. Plus, Mars's day is longer than Earth's, which would mess with our biological ingrained regulating circadian rhythms or clocks that are tuned to a 24-hour cycle. That would likely drive things out of whack, says Leonard. Shed all Earth's comforts, and Martian or spaceborne populations may well be likelier to shrink in average height compared to their comfortable Earth-living brethren. All things being equal, says Leonard. Geez, he likes those expressions, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. I think there could be a scaling down of size on Mars rather than a ramping up. I'm going to pause the show notes there and pop in my show reference for Mackie for next week. Show 372. Geez, the number just keeps going up. Goodness me. Look, there's only 5 minutes left. The thing that is probably the most striking about human height is, like I said before, if we say the pre-flood stories of people living to 700 years, if we could live to 700, our elderly age would still be 20 years at the end. Our, from toddler to possibly 30 years old would be, being a kid up to our 20s kind of experience, and then we'd live as a 30-year-old for nearly 700 years, maybe 650 years worth of living as a 30-year-old. That kind of thing, I think we'd still grow higher anyway. This was the point that Mecki and I were trying to put forward, that yeah, we could grow taller according to the science if we get the right nutrition, we don't have any illnesses, and and apparently if you're Dutch, right, you'll grow taller. But the thing is, if you were to live on Mars, we've not experienced, unless we've actually come from there, we haven't experienced any of their microbes. So it's at the moment we thaw that planet out, we're just thawing out the microbes, which then, as viruses and all sorts of things, can infect us. And we'll have, if we're not from there, then we'll have absolutely zero ability to defend ourselves against them. So, talking about growing tall. I think we'll be 2.5 feet tall, having to go through all the illnesses that we'll have to go through, because it doesn't look like anyone's lived there. They've found there's some kind of bacteria that's been there, but we have never experienced it, unless, of course, there's another caveat that panspermia has happened, and that life has just come from somewhere else and populated both the planets, and in which we would have a natural immunity to it. And if we've come from there, then we'd be immune to it too. But some people argue that maybe we weren't from here, and if you listen to the Sumerian text about the Anunnaki telling them a story that we were made here, maybe we haven't been anywhere else anyway. Maybe we're just lucky to have been able to survive as we have on this rock for so long without. And modern medicine is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but the Sumerian text describes a race of people before the flood that could live to 700 years, and that the Anunnaki told us that we were so corrupt and immoral that they made us only live to 120 years maximum. They got a kill switch in us, and kill switch is just our telomeres not being able to replicate, and therefore after 30 we start to lose the quality of our DNA copying. And it just goes downhill from there. So if that only occurred at the end of 700 years, that'd be awesome. Let's bring back all of that. I'd love that. If the Anunnaki returned, I went, oh, we didn't expect you guys to keep living for so long. Well, we're back again. What conversation would you have? Well, I wonder what the first question would be on Twitter. I have to set them up, the Anunnaki, set them up on Twitter. Yeah, and you follow them, say, so why did you answer all of our questions first, right? And okay, I want to start living till 700 again, please. Can we do that? You can just do it, right? Isn't that the way we do it? I think we'd have a lot of questions. It's coming to the end of the show. I've got only about a minute's left. So if my producer could let me know when the music's started, that'd be great. Also, stay tuned for a roundtable with Jer Bear. Be part of it. Be part of Revolution Radio. Call in. Discuss what's on your mind. Keep with the topic. Keep your phrasing short. Give others a turn. These are all the rules that we started out with, and Mackie and I, that's how we got our show. You can do the same thing. You can be part of this radio, and we also ask you to donate. Click on the ads on the station if they're appropriate to you. Buy some of those wonderful woodworking things that the output of Nighthawk, the owner, and we'll see you next week for another Shiny Side Out. Hopefully Mackie is on board. I know he's traveling. Didn't mention it, but he's traveling. He always travels. It's good to be Mackie, I suppose. It really is. Oh, still, I can't hear the music, but it can't be long away. I'm just going to push my button so I can hear it if I'm talking over it. But I ask everyone to keep your eyes open, examine the news, be the person you should be, examine all your inputs. There's the music. All right, see you guys later. Take care and have a great night.